Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to another edition of Challenger Network News. Hi, Sheree. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing fine. It's really great to have you on the show.
Thank
I
you.
want to welcome Sheree as my guest today. We have a really important topic to talk about. Earlier this month, 3 English footballers missed penalties in the Euros final, which resulted in England losing to Italy in the final. And instead of being congratulated for getting to the point of the final for the first time since 1966, these players were met with a barrage of racist abuse online. It was a truly awful reminder of how prevalent racism still is in our society. Now, football is a sport, but it's also a business. And in the business world, shareholders are placing record levels of pressure on companies to address race and diversity issues. So this is not a new topic. For decades and decades, business leaders have known that a diverse workforce breeds creativity, innovation, and ultimately better business performance. In fact, in 2019, companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity outperformed those in the bottom quartile by 36% on profitability, bottom line. But it also helps a business better understand the customers which they're trying to serve. 74% of executives acknowledge that diversity and inclusion is absolutely critical to success. Yet, we still are a long way from where we need to be. So today we're going to tackle that topic with Sheree Atcheson, Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Valtech, board member of Women Who Code, and author of one of the FT's summer books of 2021, Demanding More, Why Diversity and Inclusion Don't Happen and What You Can Do About It. So Sheree, are you ready to take this on today?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Sheree, when we had the chance to talk before the session, I had the chance to learn a little more about your background. I was really fascinated by your personal story. And how it probably shaped your view on diversity. So could you just start off by telling us a little bit about your own experiences and how that contributed to your perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. So as people can maybe tell as I'm speaking, you can probably tell I'm Irish. Now, if I covered my video right now, you probably wouldn't think that I look like how I do, which is a Southeast Asian woman. So I was adopted at 3 weeks old from Sri Lanka by a white Irish family. My brother is also adopted from Sri Lanka, and so I was raised in a very, very white space. Currently, 2% of Northern Ireland are Black, Asian, or from minority ethnic backgrounds. Where I'm actually from in Ireland is much more rural than that. I always say that when there are traffic jams or slow traffic, it's because a farmer is moving his cows from one field to another. So it's very, very rural, which means it's very, very undiverse. And so I grew up in a very small village, and there were really no other people of color bar me and my brother. Now, being adopted is one thing, but being adopted and being in an environment where you are the only is very different. Now, people talk a lot about being the only in, let's say, their workplace or their boardroom or their office or their friendship group, but actually not many people have the experience of being the only in their own family, in their extended family, in their entire school group. I always joke that it was always very easy to find me and my brother in the really long school photo because we were the only 2 brown faces in the entire school. And that may seem like, at the time, nobody wants to be different when you're younger, but certainly you face quite a lot of racism. You face a different perspective because you stand out. And the first thing that people will notice about you is your skin color. And so certainly me and my brother faced quite a lot of racism growing up. We were also from a poor background, so I grew up on free school meals, and my parents were on benefits because they became heavily disabled. And there's a really key understanding for me in that nuance of actually I've faced quite a lot of hardships, but I've also a lot of privileges as well because I was adopted. That one split decision has given me the opportunities that I have now and the access to opportunities. But the treatment that I've also had hasn't always been positive. And that's why certainly I write quite a lot about the impact of racism and what that feels on a day to day. And, when the piece happened and the treatment happened, the number of weeks ago to those 3 players, I certainly wasn't surprised, because I know what it's like to be in a position where when someone doesn't like what you do, the immediate thing they say to you is something about your skin color. So I think a lot of people of color, for the most part, were not shocked by what has happened. But I think a lot of people that have been privileged enough to not have to worry about that were very shocked.
Yeah, and I have to be dead honest. I find myself in that latter category. I still get shocked when I see that kind of behavior. It just feels like, how can this exist in 2021? But the truth is, it does, and it does. It's still very deeply embedded. And although we probably don't, well, we certainly don't see, those levels of blatant racism in the workplace. It would be good to understand what I guess the mission of diversity and inclusion, because it feels to me that it's very misunderstood. It's as I mentioned earlier in the intro, it's not misunderstood in terms of the importance. I think I would say it's nearly universally understood that diversity in the workplace is good. We've learned that through globalization as we engage with different countries around the world, and the world became more global. We've learned that as business and technology has come together and played a critical role as we've had to build open innovation ecosystems. We understand the concept that diversity is important, but still we seem to fall down somewhere. So if most people realize the importance, why has progress been so slow?
I think the really honest answer is people will care about this work until it means that you have to change something that directly affects you. People will care about this work until they accept or until they realize or have the realization that it means that we're having to rebalance things, and that means that you won't have the same continuous access that you've always had, because that hasn't been fair. Other people have not had access. And what we have to do now is, when we're talking about equity, for example, is providing access to opportunity and support for all of those different groups of people who are people of color, and specifically Black people, people from poor backgrounds, and so on and so forth, doing the work that we need to do to actually create processes that embrace them and give them environments to succeed. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, I care about diversity and inclusion. But then when they have the realization that that means, oh, maybe I will have more competition for a role when I'm going for promotion and so on, because more people are now able to compete, they suddenly don't like it. Now, what's key here is that we must acknowledge and we must accept, and I say that as me and you and anybody else listening, that we have to care about people, whether we directly or indirectly identify with the issues that they face. I must care about, for example, the LGBT plus community, regardless of the fact that I'm not a part of that community. I should care about the rights of Black people, regardless of whether I am Black or not. And there's a key part here that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it should not be self-serving. And that's why we see a lot of businesses, for example, caring about it when they're comfortable with it. But when it comes to challenging, for example, I need to change what I'm doing, or maybe this will affect me, then we see resistance.
Interesting. And you said something that kind of struck me. We need to give access. I've heard business leaders often talk about the access is here. This is an open platform. Anyone can come in.
It's not.
And you can kind of understand, like, hey, I'm not discriminating here. This is completely open. Why is that not enough? Is a question I do honestly often hear from leaders. Like, hey, we're reaching out to communities that it's open. Why is that not enough?
And I think the key here is that reaching out is step one, but there must be steps done to make sure that actually the processes that you have in place after you reach out work for all different groups. What criteria are you holding people to before you, let's say, put them through to the next stage interview? Has that really been challenged for bias? How do you train, for example, all people involved in the hiring or interview process to really rigorously challenge bias and put measures in place to find out if it exists? So using data to see, actually, do, let's say, people of color fall out of the pipeline at video stage, but actually white folks are going ahead, and then having a conversation about what that means. So reaching out is one thing, but it's like saying to someone the door is open, but actually I turn around, the door's still closed. Well, great,
right.
Thanks for telling me that it's open, but I can't get through it.
Right. And with your technical background, you talk a lot about the importance of data in understanding this. Can you just expand a little bit more on that, and how does one actually, how does data play a role?
Absolutely. So I started my career as a software engineer, and I have a computer science background. So I like to think I'm quite technically minded, but I'm definitely not a developer anymore. But the key role in data is that you cannot argue with it. It's very clear and it's very succinct and concise. Now, for me with data, this is more than just the representation data that you have or you're trying to get, for example, on who is in the workplace. What we need to take that data and actually is overlay it into every single process you have, whether it's grievance processes, whether it's hiring, promotion, progression, all of those different things, to actually see who is being affected positively, who is being affected not at all, and who is being affected negatively. The other key thing here is that inclusion data is instrumental. People regularly use the term diversity and inclusion, but what they mean is diversity representation, not inclusion. And for me, one of the things that I always use in my work is people analytics. So really understanding how do, for example, people from poorer backgrounds feel about management support versus those from different backgrounds. What about Black women versus Asian women versus white women, and so on, to actually see what's happening. Because when you take a blanket approach, you don't get that nuance. And then you can start to define success measures. You know, I roll out a sponsorship framework. I expect that metric to change. If it doesn't change, who is responsible for that? And that's the key thing as well, tying that back to the business. But for me, everything I do takes lived experience and data to make sure that we create something that is, I guess, very well-rounded and well-bodied.
And if there's any part of our society that's really good at measuring data and performance, it's business.
I mean, it should be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we run. That's how we make sure that everything we're doing is driving value for shareholders and building the business that we want to build. While we're talking, I just want to encourage, for those of you who do have a question or would like to make a comment, you can just make a comment, type it into the comments, and we'll actually see it here. And we'd be happy to address anything you'd like to ask along the way. So don't be shy, jump in the conversation and join in the debate. But yeah, back to the point around businesses. I mean, is it potentially that this has not become just core to how we operate, core to our strategy, core to almost the business as usual of how we run things? Because we measure so many other things in business, and we measure their performance and how we're doing against it, and we make those improvements just as you outlined. But is it that it's still kind of outside that core performance operation?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is what it should be. It should be part of your core business. It should be part of your strategy. But actually, one of the biggest problems is that people view diversity and inclusion work as something that sits in HR or in a people-focused remit only. But actually, what about the business strategy? So, for example, in my role, I report to the Chief Strategy Officer. In my last role, I reported to the Chief Product Officer and the Chief People Officer. So the key thing here is actually, what are you trying to influence by the diversity and inclusion work that you're doing? Is it about HR policy and processes only? Or is it about how people work together, how you reach new people, how you develop the product or the solution and so on? And for me, that's a really big part of the work that I do, is actually making sure that inclusion and diversity are considered in the creation of tech systems, on the creation of creative solutions and so on, because too often people think it's this wee siloed box under HR team or under like something that's so far down the ranks that it will never get to influence change. But actually, when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about growth plans. We're talking about business scaling and scaling globally in most instances now. And so if you're not thinking about inclusion and diversity, then you might as well not bother.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sheree. And what we talked about just prior to the show going live was, you know, a lot of times we don't address communities of potential customers that can help our business grow, because we don't understand those communities. We don't know how to service them. We don't know what makes them tick.
Exactly.
And so, you know, thinking very commercially about it, I think it's also just leaving a huge business opportunity, you know, off the table.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like if you have to think about who you're trying to reach and who who is going to buy or use or facilitate the use of your products. And if you market and you only care about reaching a subset of people, then you're obviously cutting out people that would be interested. We've seen, I think for me, one of the most powerful things about social media is the ability for people, regardless of who you are, to hold brands to account, to tell them what you're doing isn't reaching me and I don't like it, and I don't like that you expect me to potentially still buy this whilst you're treating XYZ not right, or you're not doing the right thing. And I think that's one of the ways we've seen an evolution, certainly in the last 5-10 years, where social media has really exploded, is that reaching of different markets and groups of people. And the key thing is that let's say we focus on reaching those different groups of people. We really make sure that we do. We have to make sure that our internal pieces also match that. I did a documentary with BBC a month or so ago on Do Black Lives Still Matter, where I assessed what different brands were doing, different sporting brands, the FA and so on, the music industry. And what's key here is, like, for example, the music industry serves and makes a lot of money from the Black community specifically, but executives in the region are mostly not Black. So the highest paid people making the money from the Black talent specifically are not Black. So why are we not seeing the traversing moving up the ranks there? And that's what I mean by you can't do one without the other. Those two things work hand in hand.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And we had a guest a few weeks ago who used a great phrase I love to repeat. Stan Slap. He says, if you can't sell it inside, you can't sell it outside.
Yeah, well, exactly that. Yeah.
And I think that's so true. So, okay, I'm sure that a lot of business leaders are watching this or listening to this, and they're thinking, okay, I totally agree with everything we're talking about, but what can I do? What can I do on Monday that's different, that's going to make a difference?
My first thing to say to you is, if you aren't collecting data already on who is in the business, start doing that. Start the process with the legal team, your data team, and so on, to figure out what you can ask, when you can ask it, and how you can ask it. It's impossible to do a D&I strategy that is data-driven, or to be able to succinctly say we have an inclusive workplace without having data to back it up. The second thing that I need you to do is be accountable for this. So see the KPIs and the OKRs that you have around your business goals. Start creating goals around diversity and inclusion, whether that's around representation, whether that's around the progression of underrepresented groups up the ranks. Start thinking about how you incorporate that into how you yourself are rated. You will take time to get this right. It will not happen overnight, but those things are key. And the third thing is allyship. As leaders, and as someone who is also a leader, one of the key roles that we have to have here is allyship, is really genuinely intervening and getting involved in situations and processes that need to be made better for everyone. That can be something as simple as calling out when something isn't acceptable, but it also can be things like challenging promotion decisions, challenging hiring decisions, asking if a process has been considered from all of the different perspectives that it needs to be. Considering, for example, diversity and inclusion when you're thinking about headcount growth or new businesses or mergers and acquisitions, making sure that that's also part of the consideration. Those three things are really, really key from business leaders, is that, I guess at the base level, is that you use your voice and you use it in a way that is for people both like you and not like you at the same time.
Yeah, we recently did a 3-part series on our own industry, the consulting industry, and women in consulting. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned from that is that women are over mentored and under sponsored.
Yes.
Yeah, and so when you talk about allyship, I one of the things that I've certainly and continuing to try to improve in my own behavior is that sponsorship. Not just, hey, let me give you some advice.
No.
Really taking someone by the arm and saying, come on, I'm going to help you get to the place where I know you can get to.
Absolutely.
And doing that very proactively and investing in people.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's investing in people. And I read about this in Demanding More as well. Sponsorship frameworks are one of my favorite things, because if they are done well and they're measured appropriately, they can be incredibly impactful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Sheree, that's all the time we have today. It goes so fast. But it has been an honor and a pleasure to just have even a brief conversation with you on this topic. If you haven't read the book, I do encourage you to pick up Demanding More from Sheree. It's excellent. We'll put a link for the book in the comments, and we'll pass this on for future episodes as well. So Sheree, thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend, and thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'll see you soon.
All right, and we'll see everyone else next time on Challenger Network News. For now, enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next time.